This episode of Trifles is made possible by listeners like you who support us on Patreon and Substack. To learn more, go to patreon.com/trifles or trifles.substack.com.
Welcome to Trifles, a weekly podcast about the Sherlock Holmes stories.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Yes, the cyclist was solitary, the bachelor was noble, and the resident was patient, but there are so many other details to pick apart in the stories.
Pray, be precise as to details.
You know the plots, but what about the minutiae? On which 3 continents did Watson have experience of women? When did 221B Baker Street first get telephone service? And why does Holmes prefer telegrams over writing?
You are very inquisitive, Mr. Holmes.
It is my business to know what other people don't know.
Scott Monty and Bert Wolder will have the answers to these questions and more in Trifles.
The game's afoot.
Episode 454, The Lumber Room. Hello and welcome to Trifles, the Sherlock Holmes podcast where we get into the details in the Sherlock Holmes stories. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Bert Wolder.
And Bert, are you all limbered up?
I am. I've got my Limburger cheese, my limb, and a burger. Oh, wait a minute. What did I do with the burger? You know, I hate that because it gets very greasy and then it seeps into the roll and it's very hard to handle.
I have an idea.
Oh, what is it?
Put it in your lumber room.
My lumber room.
Not your lumburger room. Or your lumbago room, for that matter.
I keep my twigs there in my lumber room.
Well, this is another episode of Trifles, where we are getting into the minutiae, as we say. In this case, it's taking a piece of terminology. This is a topic that was recommended to us or suggested to us by listener Kai Johansson, who said he wanted to know more about lumber rooms. And there are occasional instances when we run across phrases in the canon that are not really familiar to us. And maybe we can intuit what it might be, but it might be more interesting to dig a little deeper and understand the terminology of the time. So if you would like to support the show, you can do so by going to Patreon or Substack for as little as $1 a month. That gives you the ability to listen to the show without advertisements, gives you the ability to take in additional content, bonus content that we produce from time to time, including our monthly series, Trifling Trifles, shorter episodes that don't require as much discussion from us. So check those out and see what works for you. And we would also ask that if you are able to leave us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you happen to listen that accepts ratings or reviews. Your kind words about the show help other people understand what it is that they're in for, poor souls that don't know us yet, and helps other people find the show. And of course, we always encourage feedback. You can email us at trifles@ihearofsherlock.com and let us know what you think. And obviously, like Kai, you can give us ideas for an episode. So it's all on you. Check out those links in our show notes. Okay, we are on our way to the lumber room, but Bert, I suppose before we dig into this topic, it might help us understand where we come across the phrase lumber room in the Sherlock Holmes stories.
Oddly enough, there are 3 appearances, at least, of lumber room that I found off the top of my canon. And it's in 3 different stories. One is really, more significant than actually, they're all interesting in different ways. One is rather large. It's the 5 orange pips, the barrel coronet, and 6 Napoleons. And there's a I suppose the best place to start is maybe in the 5 Orange Pips. I mean, in that story, we have some early conversation between John Openshaw and Holmes and Watson. And Openshaw is telling Holmes and Watson about his uncle Elias and the time he spent with his uncle Elias just before, the dreaded communication from the KKK arrives. And he's describing the house and his uncle Elias's peculiar habits. And what had happened there is that he was really left in charge of things by his uncle Elias, which he liked fine. And he says to Holmes, I kept all the keys. I could go where I liked. I could do what I liked, as long as I didn't disturb his privacy. But there was one exception, for he had a single room, a lumber room up among the attics, which was invariably locked, and which he would never permit either me or anyone else to enter.
A lumber room among the attics.
Bum, bum, bum. And then Openshaw says, with the boy's curiosity, I've peeped through the keyhole. But I was never able to see more than such a collection of old trunks and bundles as would be expected in such a room. And that's really gets you to the definition of lumber room, because it's really a storage space where you would put things like old furniture and things. And the idea is not necessarily lumber qua lumber. It's things that the household had been lumbered with or no longer had regular use for, but you still wanted to keep. And so these rooms were sort of located, in stable lofts and up near the attic and things like that.
That is fascinating. Just as a regular American, modern-ish reader, I always associated the term lumber, with simply wood, with, supplies for building. Whether you're building a fire or building furniture or a house, that to me was the common use of lumber. And I figured, it was just a room where they stored wood, and of course they didn't use wood fires. Right. In houses in England at the time. It was predominantly coal-fired stoves and fireplaces. So it's not that you would have a room to store your fuel for your fireplace, but unless you were breaking up the family heirlooms, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, and then that sort of gets us, that definition gets us to actually the fourth. I didn't mention this. I just said 3, 5 Orange Pips, Barrel Cornet, and 6 Napoleons. But really the first time we find out about it is in Study in Scarlet, because Watson has put together, he's trying to understand who Sherlock Holmes is, and they have this discussion about the solar system and all of that. And Holmes says, now that you've explained all that to me, I'm going to forget it. And Holmes begins his explanation that he really wants to keep in his brain, available for easy recall, all the things he needs to successfully work. And he says to Watson, that's how you have to stock your brain. You have to stock it with such furniture as you choose. Only a fool takes in all the lumber of every sort that he comes across. And so, workman is very careful indeed as to what he takes into his brain attic. And, maybe there isn't a lumber room reference there in Study in Scarlet. I see just the name, just the lumber. So maybe we didn't actually get to the lumber room. But basically everything else gets stored in the lumber room. And that's what we come to later in 6 Napoleons, where Holmes adds to that definition.
Well, but there's an interesting reference, because you said in the 5 Orange Pips that Uncle Elias was he had this single room, the lumber room up among the attics, and it was locked. And later in the 5 Orange Pips,
right.
When Watson asked, "Well, who's the KKK?" Holmes grinned. He said, "Well, I say now as I say then, that a man should keep his little brain attic stocked with all the furniture that he is likely to use, and the rest he can put away in the lumber room of his library, where he can get it if he wants it. All right, so we've got the brain attic and the lumber room of his library.
There you go. Yeah, and interestingly enough, the way he gets there in that conversation, right before that, he and Watson are chuckling over Watson's early list about Holmes and his limits. And so that's sort of a recall to Study in Scarlet. But yeah, the lumber room of his library. Also, that's all the facts that he has been lumbered with, but doesn't necessarily want to dispose of.
Yeah, I like that. That's a great analogy of the term, because right there in the very same story, we're talking about a literal lumber room.
Yeah.
That the uncle had. It was always locked, so it was a storage room.
Right.
And Holmes talking about the lumber room of your library.
Right, metaphorical. Now, interestingly enough, the reference in Six Napoleons is even more interesting, because what happens there in Six Napoleons is, without going into a tremendous amount of detail, there's a point here in the case where Holmes has got to consult some of the papers that he's stored away, the daily papers. And Watson says Holmes spent the evening so they're in Baker Street. Holmes spent the evening in rummaging among the files of the old daily papers with which one of our lumber rooms was packed. And then he finds, of course, what he's looking for. But isn't that interesting? So there's a lumber room in Baker Street, but there's at least more than one, and that they have. So you have to wonder what's in the other.
I was just
lumber
going to
rooms.
say, what's Mrs. Hudson keeping up there?
It calls to mind, the stories of these hoarders. Some people who were found. I can't remember what was the name of the brothers who were found. They'd piled their house with just stacks of newspapers, and one of these piles, I think, had collapsed on one of them, and there was a famous pair of brothers who sort of were consumed, unfortunately, at the end by their stacked possessions.
The Murdochs? Oh, no, we wish.
No, you're thinking of Lachlan. No, that's... No, Rupert is getting rid of a lot of his...
Yeah, well, did I ever tell you the story? And I know this is a tangent here, but John Besh, the late John Besh, member of the Baker Street Irregulars, a longtime Sherlockian friend of mine, I took over his apartment. It was the second story of a two-family house, two-bedroom apartment. And John kept the second bedroom essentially as his lumber room. And I will help you understand exactly how it functioned as a lumber room. To go into this room was to take your life into your own hands. It was lined with bookshelves, built-out bookshelves, not with the house. When you could get it, say IKEA or what have you. Right, so they lined the walls, and they were groaning with books. Now, you could always say that if these bookshelves collapsed inward toward the center of the room, you could be crushed to death. However, you would have been protected because there was a pile of books in the center of the room, such that it rivaled the Great Pyramid of Cheops in Giza. It would have kept those bookshelves from collapsing all the way to the floor. Anyway, we were cleaning up John's apartment in preparation for his move, and he was in that, I'll just say it, that lumber room, sorting through those books in that center pyramid. And all of a sudden, we heard a scream. Oh, my God! And we thought that, in fact, those bookshelves had collapsed as John was pulling books out. And we ran in there, and we go, what happened? And he screamed in delight, there's a chair under this pile of books. Now that, my friends, is a lumber room extraordinaire where he's storing basically his library. That was the lumber room of his library. And there was furniture underneath the books.
Chair. Oh, wonderful. It's one less chair we have to buy. Well, I was thinking of the Collier brothers, the so-called hoarding hermits of Harlem.
There you
They
go.
lived at Fifth Avenue and 128th Street in the 30s and 40s, and they were unfortunate. It's a sad mental condition of just not throwing away anything, really. And unfortunately, they were eventually done in by that.
And interestingly, I know we still have a couple of references left here, but as we were preparing for this, in searching for Lumber Room online, I found there is a story by H.H. Munro.
Oh, Saki.
Called The Lumber Room. And it's a humorous story, and it's satire mostly, and it highlights the generation gap of the world, the children's world and the world of authoritarian adults. And it was published in 1914 as part of a short story collection called Beats and Super Beasts. And I'm sure you can still find that. But the idea here is that the children had the lumber room, this storage room, as a place to explore and to hide from the adults in their lives.
Very good.
Oh.
Well, it's the 5 orange pips. You've got these 2 references, and then 6 Napoleons. We've just mentioned that. So they've got more than one lumber room in Baker Street. And the last, it pops up in Beryl Coronet, because of course, as you would think, when someone gives you an irreplaceable royal crown, you've got to put it in a secure place. Well, of course, you'll be thinking about the cupboard in your lumber room, which is exactly the right place, and that's where our pal, the banker, puts the Beryl Coronet.
Yeah, Alexander Holder.
Yeah.
That's and I suppose, if like Uncle Elias in the 5 Orange Pips, I suppose if the lumber room were locked and the cupboard inside the lumber room were locked, then, there would be kind of a sense of security about the whole thing. Not having to worry about someone breaking in and finding something valuable. And, that leads me to wonder, for Victorians who did use lumber rooms for storing unused furniture, would they have regularly placed valuables in a lumber room? Is it something that they viewed as easy to access, like the lumber rooms at Baker Street, where you could just zip up the stairs and grab what you needed and come back down? Or was it something that was out of sight, out of mind, and, locked away in some far recess of the house?
Actually, I'm wrong here. He didn't put the coronet there. Just after I said it, I said to myself, that doesn't sound right. It's actually in his dressing room. But the way we get to lumber room in Beryl Coronet is apparently it's the same key. There's a bureau in the banker's dressing room, and a large bureau. And Holmes goes to the bureau and looks hard at the lock and says, how was this opened? And Holder says, well, it was the key that my son indicated. It was the key from the cupboard of the lumber room. And so he apparently had a bureau and a cupboard upstairs that used the same lock. And so that was how the actual bureau was opened.
I would have felt very worried about leaving anything in his bank.
Yeah. I say, Mr. Holder, are those bags of 100-pound notes? Well, yes.
You can just use the key to the men's lavatory to open up the safe.
I took them home, and there wasn't room in the kitchen. So, but they'll go back tomorrow.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, folks, here's an interesting question. Do you have a lumber room in your house? This kind of brings to mind the old essay that Vincent Starrett wrote years ago. Is there a Tamerlane in your attic? Well, is there a lumber room in your house? Could be a crawl space. Could be a storage room. Could be something, I don't know, more akin to a garret, a piece of your attic, a place where you might secret things that are valuable to you, or perhaps store things that you are no longer using or can't fit. Part of the wonderful architecture of our modern and historic lives.
And that is just a great place to keep your trifle.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Please join us again next week for another installment of Trifles. Show notes are available on SherlockHolmesPodcast.com. Please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and be sure to check out our longer show, I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, where we interview notable Sherlockians and share news of the Sherlockian world.
You've taken my breath away, Mr. Holmes.
So, what do you make of it, gentlemen?